Hey guys, so this is a video I want to do for a while now, and we're finally doing it. We're going to be doing a winner ranking of the Circle US, where we'll be ranking all 5 winners based on the games that they played during their seasons. Now, this is a bit of a different list from ranking them as players overall, as I think that would certainly be a different list, but that's for another time. But there are 5 winners to look at, and obviously there are spoilers for all these seasons, so if you don't want to be spoiled, don't watch the video. But let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 5, the worst winner in the Circle US is someone that I know a lot of people like, and even the show has gone out of their way to prop this person up, but if we're looking at their game, I'm just not that impressed by it. But we have the winner of Season 2, we have Delisha, and I know a lot of people prop up Delisha's game, how she was the first winner to win as a catfish, but that's one of their issues is that they didn't play the catfish role super well, where despite her coming off as a single parent, she just kept bringing up the fact that she was a single parent to the point that people started to suspect that she was a catfish. And we even saw the women coming together early on talking about how Delisha was a catfish. And part of the reason why Savannah ended up blowing up her game during that early round is because she chooses to save Delisha during that first round, even after the women bonded over her being a catfish. And it's not as if Delisha did too much to get Savannah to save her and blow up her game as a result. It's just something that happened. But even beyond that, she does do pretty well in the ratings moving forward. She gets a bunch of third place finishes. She does become influencer once. However, even then, we'll talk about that more in a minute. I don't think she made the correct decision there. But really, Delisha is someone who isn't really in the core majority during most of the game. I feel like Courtney and River are more so running the game for a lot of it, while Delisha is more so on the outs. Now, we do see her build this alliance with Mitchell and Kat that were determined to get out Courtney and River. However, even then, they're unsuccessful in doing so. And during that one time where Delisha is an influencer, she agrees to block Kat, which is really bad for her game and really gives more power to Courtney and River. And moving forward, again, she isn't able to get out Courtney or River. And by the end, a big reason that she wins is that certain people are voting strategically to where some of the bigger threats like Courtney and River are being downvoted in the ratings, while she is being propped up more as a result. Now, granted, you do have to give her some credit for building relationships with people throughout the game. She has a good relationship with Chloe, for instance. That is a factor in why she is able to ultimately win at the end. But if we're looking at her overall game, both in terms of dominance in the ratings, but also in terms of her maneuvering of the game, I feel like she had the least control out of any winner, which is why I do have her here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we actually have the most recent winner of the circle, and here we have Sam Carmona. And I think Sam and Delisha are a bit similar in my opinion. They didn't really dominate the game too much, and they were only influencer ones. However, I think Sam was more insulated within the majority for more of the game. Now, she does have a really bad first rating where she is last place in the first rating, even getting below Brett and Xanthi, who a lot of people in the game want to block. However, she builds a very good relationship with Chaz and Raven that allows her to be within the majority moving forward. She then jumps to third place in the following rating, which is pretty good. And I do think throughout the game, she does a good job of building relationships. However, with that, I feel like through Chaz and Raven getting more power and with people like Tom and Jennifer maneuvering the game more strategically, I feel like Sam is someone that rarely actually gets power, where the only time she becomes influencer is during the round that Marvin goes home. And even then, by then, Marvin was a consensus target, so it's not as if that was necessarily that big of a move. But really, Sam is someone who doesn't really have too much direct control throughout the game. However, she is within the majority alliance, and she is very close to the people who are running the game. And I feel like by the end, a big reason why she wins is that she has people at the end like Tasia and Jennifer who are tanking Chaz and Raven in the ratings, which in turn raises her in the ratings. And again, similar to Delisha, you do have to give her credit for having good enough relationships with the people in the game to where they're willing to vote her highly in the ratings without seeing her as that big of a threat. But if we're strictly basing this off dominance, I don't think Sam was necessarily running the game for a lot of it. So because of that, I do have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and I actually debated these next two as I think these players do have plenty of issues within their game. And I feel like this person that I decided to go with has more issues with their game that I can point to than the number 2 person. But here we have the winner of season 3. We have James. And James is obviously tough to assess as he came to the game relatively late, coming in episode 6, so about halfway through. So already he does skip a decent chunk of the game. However, I do think James does very effective work once he gets into the game at building bonds with people, where right away he's able to insulate himself within Roxana and Kay's alliance that allows him to be within some sort of power structure. Now, season 3 is a more dynamic season of the game compared to all the other ones. So, through that, James is contending with Nick's alliance, the band, which does complicate things to a degree. And to James's credit, he does become influencer 2 of the 3 times that he's eligible to do so. However, with Nick in the game, I do think that makes things a bit wonky with him, where during the first round where he's influencer, he's there with Nick, and he agrees to block Daniel, who is technically one of James's allies. However, he's also able to make a deal with Nick that allows him and Kay to be safe for the next round. However, that doesn't really matter, as the very next round, James becomes influencer yet again. However, this time he does agree to block Jackie, which is a pretty big knock in my opinion, as Jackie was someone that James built a very close relationship with, was obviously the latest person to be added to the game. And I think James probably would have had a cleaner road at the end if he was able to keep Jackie in the game. But again, with Nick around, Nick really had his way there. And I feel like by James giving in, it was a bit of an issue there. However, I do think in the process, James was also pretty effective at managing his threat level to where coming into the final ratings, Nick was such a big target that people instantly tanked him in the ratings. And with James still having those close bonds, he was able to squeak his way to a win there. So James is tough because on one hand, there is less of a game to assess. He only is in the game for about half the season, whereas every other winner was in it from the beginning. And I do think those mistakes of agreeing to block Daniel and Jackie, people he was closer to than Nick was, is also a knock at the end of the day. However, if I'm being honest, I actually think James is still a very capable player. I actually think out of all the winners of the show, James is probably the best overall player. And I feel like if you put James on other social strategy games, that I would have the most confidence in James to do well. However, considering the fact that he was on a season with Nick, someone who was playing the game very strategically, and considering the fact that I think Nick got his way more often than James did, I can't really have James too much higher than here, but I'm still pretty impressed by James's overall game, and he is here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and we actually have the original winner of the Circle US, and here we have Joey Sasso. And I was actually a bit surprised that Joey ended up being this high, as if you look at his actual placements across the season, it's not that impressive, where he does get 3 fourth place finishes in a row. He also ties for 5th at one point. However, I don't knock that as much, as this was season 1, and this was still a point where you had people like Antonio trying to play the game more strategically. And while season 1 has this reputation of people caring more about genuine bonds and playing strategically, I feel like that doesn't really materialize until later in the season once the bigger players and Antonio are out. So I do think Joey actually being in the middle of the pack during these early ratings isn't that bad for him, especially considering that the first boot in the season was Alana, who was 3rd place in the first rating. However, once the game starts to become more about relationships, I think that's where Joey really starts to shine, where he does become influencer twice, where the first time he's able to block Miranda, and the second time he is the super influencer, and through that he's able to block Sean. And with him having these very tight bonds with multiple players in the game, with Ed, with Sammy, with Chris, and obviously Shuby, he's able to do very well in the final ratings, winning the game in pretty swift fashion. So I think if we're looking at Joey's game, it is relatively impressive, where he is in the majority group for pretty much the entire game. I feel like he benefits a lot from this season being about genuine bonds, where later on, once he's able to get past the first impressions, that he is able to really flourish in the game. And if we are basing this off dominance, I do think he was a bit more dominant than a lot of people we already talked about. And I feel like he made slightly better strategic decisions with the choices that he was making as influencer. So I think those are things that contribute to him being number 2 on this winner ranking. However, compared to the number 1 person, he was only influencer twice, and I feel like he didn't dominate the game as much, which is why he is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the best winner in the Circle US is the winner of Season 4, and here we have Frank Grimsley. Now again, this is based purely off their game, as if we are basing them as a player, I don't think Frank is necessarily that strategic of a player, as I feel like during a season, a lot of his success comes from people just gravitating towards him and being willing to rate him so highly in the ratings over and over again, and Frank just being a very likable person. And I feel like with these circle, and particularly these later seasons, focusing so much off the genuine bonds of players versus strict social strategy, I think that very much benefits someone like a Frank to do well. Whereas I feel like in other situations that Frank would just be such a big threat, and with him not really playing the game super strategically, that it wouldn't really allow him to get out of bad situations if he wasn't in a strong position. However, if we are looking at season 4, he pretty much dominates the game from beginning to end. Where of the 4 times where ratings were involved, he is first place in 3 of those 4 ratings. And the one time where he wasn't first, he was third in the rating. So there's that to consider. People really gravitated towards him for pretty much the entire game. And it's really crazy how, despite him continuing getting first place in the ratings, that people never really put up much of a fight to tank him in the ratings. Whereas I feel like the only person that could have possibly done that was Alex. And even then, Alex is someone that never really had much power in the game. So I think through that, Frank really was able to steamroll. And by the end, despite me thinking that he wasn't going to win based off how big of a threat he was and how consistently well he did in the ratings, people didn't care and they just voted genuinely. They rated him high in the ratings and he won the game in swift fashion. Like, it's really mind boggling how Frank was able to essentially dominate the ratings from beginning to end, and nothing ever seemed to weaken his position throughout the entire game. And I feel like compared to all the other winners, Frank is the one person that has had the most power, and he is the one person that has probably had the biggest run to actually winning the game, despite me thinking that overall, how much of it was active, how much of it was intentional, I'm not entirely sure. But if we are just looking at the game, it is the most impressive game, and because of that, he is here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out with the channel. Now, I did have a couple other circle videos that I might make down the road, so stay tuned for those. I'm also making other content for other reality shows as well, so stay tuned for that as well. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.